Hare Krishna. So today we will be discussing the next verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. So today we'll be discussing the next verse of Bhagavatam, that is chapter 1, Canto 1, chapter 9, text 34. I will try and share this. So before I begin, I would like to offer my prayers. Om Agniyanatimirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurpunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamaryam Tatanti Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sabjatam Sagara Raghunatham Sudam Sajivam Sadaitam Savadutam Parijana Senitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhantitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostade Sapta Kanchana Gauran Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Pada Krishna 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 Jaya Pata Swami Pradani Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna, we'll recite the verse and go with the purport. So, 1.9.34. Yudhi Taranga, Yudhi Turaga Rango Vidurma Vishvikam Kachat Luchita Sramvariya Alankaristha Mama Nishtita Sahasre Vibhidayamana Tvachi Vilasita Kavache Astu Krishna Atma. So, word to word meaning, translation, and purpose by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Word to word meaning, Yudhi on the battlefield, Turanga horses, Rajaha dust, Vidhumar turned as ashen color, Vishvaka waving, Kacha hair, Lulita scattered, Shamavari perspiration, Alankrit decorated with Asya unto the face, Mama my Nishkita sharp, Sahasre the arrows, Vibhidayamana pierced by Tvachi in the skin, Vilasita enjoying pleasure, Kavache protecting armor, Astu let there be Krishna unto Shri Krishna, Atma mind. Translation. On the battlefield where Sri Krishna attended Arjuna, out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by the hoofs of horses, and because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations intensified the wounds dealt by mind-sharp arrows were employed by him. Let mind does go unto Sri Krishna. Purport: the Lord is the absolute form of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. has such transcendental loving service to the Lord in one of the five principal relations, namely Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya, that is neutrality, servitorship, fraternity, um, parental affection, and conjugal love, is graciously accepted by the Lord when offered to the Lord in genuine love and affection. Sri Bhishma Deva is a great devotee of the Lord in in the relation of servitorship. Thus, this his throwing of sharp arrows at the transcendental body of the Lord is as good as worship of another devotee who throws soft roses upon him. It appears that Bhishma Dev is repenting the actions he committed against the person of the Lord, but factually the Lord's body are not at all pained, but due to his transcendental existence, his body is not matter. Both he himself and body are complete spiritual identity. Spirit is never pierced, burned, dried, moistened, etc. This is vividly explained in the Bhagavad Gita. So, as it is stated in the Skanda Purana, it is said that the spirit is always uncontaminated and indestructible. It cannot be distressed nor it can be dried. When Lord Vishnu in his incarnation appears before us, he seems to be like one of the conditioned soul materially engaged just to bewilder the asuras and the non-believers who are always alert to kill the Lord. Even from the beginning of his appearance, Kamsa wanted to kill Krishna and Ravana wanted to kill Rama because foolishly they were unaware of the fact that the Lord is never killed, for the spirit is never annihilated. Therefore, Bhishma Dev's piercing of the body of Lord Krishna is is a sort of bewildering problem for the non-devotee atheist. Thus, but those who are devotees or liberated souls are not bewildered. Bhishma Dev appreciated the all merciful attitude of the Lord because he did not leave Arjuna alone. Although he was disturbed by the sharpened arrows of Bhishma Dev, nor he was reluctant to come before Bhishma Dev's deathbed, even though he was ill treated by him on the battlefield. Bhishma's repentance and the Lord's mercy attitude are both unique in this picture. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, a great acharya and a devotee, the humor of conjugal love with the Lord remarks very saliently in this regard. He says that the wounds created on the body of the Lord by the sharpened arrows of Bhishma Deva were as pleasing to the Lord as the biting of a fiancé who bites the Lord's body directed by a strong sense of sex desire. Such biting of the opposite sex is never taken as a sign of enmity, even if there is a wound on the body. Therefore, the fighting has an exchange of transcendental pleasure between the Lord and his pure devotee. Sri Bhishma Dev was not at all mundane. Besides that, since the Lord's body and the Lord are identical, there was no possibility of wounds in the absolute body. The apparent wounds caused by the sharpened arrows were misleading to the common man. But one who has a little absolute knowledge can understand the transcendental exchange in the Chelberius relation. The Lord was perfectly happy with the wounds caused by the sharpened arrows of Bhishma Dev. The word Vibhidayanan is significant because the Lord's skin is not different from the Lord. Because our skin is different from our soul. In our case, the word Vibhidyamana or being bruised and cut would have been quite suitable. The transcendental bliss is of different varieties, and varieties of activities in the mundane world is but a perverted reflection of the transcendental bliss, because everything in mundane world is qualitatively mundane. It is full of inebrities, whereas in the absolute realm, because everything is of the same absolute nature, there are varieties of enjoyment without inebriety. The Lord enjoyed the wounds created by his great devotee Bhishma, and because Bhishma Dev is a devotee in the Chalbis relation, he fixes up his mind on Krishna in that wounded condition. So Hare Krishna. So we were even in yesterday's class, we know, I mean, in the couple of verses, this Bhishma Stuti is been going on as to how Bhishma Dev, who is one of the Mahajan, is offering his prayers when he's on the deathbed. His mind is completely fixed upon Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is the Supreme Lord Krishna, and he's continuously offering prayers to Bhishma Dev, and these prayers are sorry to Bhishma. The prayers offered by Bhishma Dev are so special because he's even in such a condition where the soul is living the body, that is, he's quitting his body. Even in such a painful condition, Bhishma Dev is trying to focus all of his senses on the Supreme Lord, centralizing the Supreme Lord. He's trying to focus all of his senses upon the Supreme Lord. And in this way, he's setting an example to all the devotees as to how one has to quit his body and how he is to remember the Lord. So here, similarly, Bhishma Dev is describing about the personal feature of the Lord, as to how beautifully the Lord is being dressed. So it is something so unusual for us because we are being affected by the three modes of material nature. It is something so difficult for us to perceive or get convinced as to the way the Bhishma Dev is describing the Lord, because we are able to see in the purport as well as in the translation. Prabhupada writes that, the Lord is covered with sweat, and the arrows have pierced the Lord's body, and, blood is oozing out. So nobody finds this form of any person where blood is coming out and somebody is covered with sweat and dust and everything. Nobody finds it in general on a material platform. Nobody finds it attractive, but Bhishma Dev is on such a transcendental and an elevated position. And because the sweat is coming out of the Supreme's Lord, the body of the Supreme Lord, and because even though the Supreme Lord is covered by dust, blood, and sweat, even in that case, the Supreme Lord is, seem all attractive to his devotees. So we can see in case of Bhishma Dev also, even though the Lord's, hair is being covered with dust, even though he's on that battlefield and he's sweating profusely, even in that case, Bhishma Dev finds the Lord very attractive. So I was hearing to a lecture from one of the Vaishnavas. He was mentioning as to how in nowhere in any other scriptures you can find anybody describing this personal feature, this beautiful form of Lord. Because even in the previous verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, we have seen how Bhishma Dev is, addressing the Lord as to how beautifully decorated he is. When the Lord comes along with the Pandavas to visit, to give darshan to Bhishma Dev. Bhishma Dev is describing how beautifully he's dressed with the glittering yellow garments and everything. But in no other scriptures, it could be in Bible or in Quran, you can find, this description of the Lord. It can just be mentioned telling that the Lord is all beautiful. But how beautiful the Lord is, what color, what type of garments the Lord is wearing, or how is he being dressed? it is said that he was that senior Vaishnava from whom I was hearing the class. He was mentioning as to how in nowhere you can find such beautiful description of Lord except in Srimad Bhagavatam, and that is why Srimad Bhagavatam is the essence of all the scriptures. Even Guru Maharaj himself tells that it is the ripened fruit of all the Vedic literature, because only in Srimad Bhagavatam, you can find how beautifully the devotees of the Lord are offering prayers and describing the personal features of the Lord. So that is how Bhishma Dev is even in this condition in battlefield where the Lord is covered with blood and sweat. Even that form of Lord is very attractive to the devotees. So it is just not orally telling that the Lord is all attractive, but Bhishma Dev here is proving it. Even though the Lord is in the battlefield, even in battlefield he's attractive, even though even when the Lord is in his supreme abode, that is Golok Vrindavan, all dressed with beautiful jewelry, with fragrant flowers. Even that form of Lord is very attractive to the devotees. Even this form where the Lord is all with sweat and blood, even this form of Lord is attractive. So Krishna means, Prabhupada tells, the word Krishna itself means the one who attracts the other, or the one who is all attractive. And Bhishma Dev is emphasizing on the same aspect as to how Supreme Lord is all attractive, even though he is on the battlefield. And another important uh, point that we can take from the purport is the Supreme Lord is Satchit Ananda Vigraha. Every day when we perform Darshanarati to the Supreme Lord, we know as to how the verse goes, Ishvara Paramha Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So how the Supreme Lord is Satchit and Ananda, full of eternal bliss and knowledge. So the Supreme Lord, we can see as to how even we being the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, even we are Satchitananda. When we were rendering service to the Supreme Lord at his supreme abode in Golok Vrindavan, even we were Satchitananda. But what has happened is, because we have rebelled against the Lord, and because we wanted to enjoy, and we have rebelled against the Lord, and we have come down to this material world. Even though we were Satchitananda, because we have come down to the material world, and we have come in contact with the three modes of material nature, and because of that, the Satchitananda nature of the living entity is being taken away. So to better understand this concept of Satchit Ananda, we can take an example of a raindrop, as to how a raindrop, when the rain starts pouring, and the raindrop when it starts when the rain starts pouring, and when the raindrop is coming out of the clouds, we can see as to how pure the raindrop is. But as soon as it comes down and touches the ground, which is completely filled with mud, it becomes contaminated. It is fit for nothing. So similarly is our our nature. We are also the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but because we have come in contact with the material nature, we have lost that Satchitananda form. So one may now ask that Prabhupada is mentioning in the purport, telling that the form of the Supreme Lord is his Satchit and Ananda. But even if he's Sachit and Ananda, how is that blood is coming out of his body when the arrows have been pierced by Bhishma Dev? So here, here in purport, Prabhupada tells that Supreme Lord cannot be understood by anybody. So this is one of the most important aspects that we have to take away from today's session, maybe, because the Supreme Lord does not reveal himself to everybody, because it is so bewildering, yeah, because the Supreme Lord himself was, taking up, lifting the chariot wheel, and he was all ready to kill Bhishma Dev. And the same Supreme Lord has become so compassionate and merciful that, he's coming well dressed along with the Pandavas to give darshan to Bhishma Dev in order to fulfill his desire. So, because Bhishma Dev had desired that he wanted to look at the Supreme Lord, the beautiful form of the Lord, while he was quitting his body. So, it is so bewildering for a Jivatma to understand as to how what the activities and the pastimes of the Supreme Lord is, so confusing. It would not be possible for a Jivatma to understand it. So, when we read Srimad Bhagavatam under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master or his representatives, that is when the pastimes of the Supreme Lord are revealed. Because when we read Mahabharata, it would be so bewildering, the position of Bhishma Dev. It would seem that he's on the he's supporting the adharmas of the Kauravas, and in spite of him knowing what Kauravas were doing, he's still taking the side of the Kauravas. But when we read Srimad Bhagavatam, as I mentioned, that it is the essence of all the scriptures. Here in Srimad Bhagavatam, actually, it reveals as to how glorious is the position of Bhishma Dev. Even though he knew that he was taking the side of adharma, but he knew that it would please the Supreme Lord. This action of him fighting on the side of Kauravas would please this Supreme Lord. He took the stand on the other side, and just for the pleasure of the Lord, he fought against Pandavas. So the point I'm trying to tell is that the activities of the Lord is, it cannot be understood by the mundane people, and that is what Srila Prabhupada is also writing as to how the Lord incarnates in this material world. We are all assuming that the Lord is just like us. He's taking a material body, he's coming down and is performing various activities or various leelas, and after a particular period of time, the Lord goes back to his supreme abode. We are assuming that the Lord is no more existing and he's dead, but we are unable to understand the fact that he's Satchit Ananda, he's a spirit soul, and the soul never dies. And for this, the Prabhupada is giving reference from Bhagavad Gita as to how the spirit soul, it cannot be cut, it cannot be moistened, it cannot be pierced, and that soul is eternal, and only body keeps changing. If the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is a complete full description as to how soul is permanent and only the body keeps changing. And Prabhupada, for this, he gives an example of clothes, as to how the clothes we keep changing, as in when it gets old, we keep changing we keep changing from one cloth to another, from one dress to another. So similarly, the body keeps changing, but the soul inside the body is eternal, it's permanent. So similarly, in case of the Lord also, because he is Satchit Ananda, there is no time as to when the Lord dies. There is no point as to when the Lord dies. It is only that the Lord descends to this material world. He performs his leelas for the pleasure of his devotees. So it is always mentioned that there are two reasons as to why the Lord descends. Has one, it is always mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, that is yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. And as and when there is adharma, he descends to annihilate the demons and to re-establish the dharma. So this could be the external reason, and the internal reason is that the Lord descends with his own free will in order to reciprocate and enjoy the pastimes with his devotees. So if the Lord had desired, he could have stayed in his supreme abode, and just by the will of the Lord, we know as to how he empowers Brahma to do the secondary creation, and the secondary creation is done. So that is how powerful the Supreme Lord is. So just by his desire, the Supreme Lord can, if his only purpose is to destroy the demons or adharmic people, just by his desire he can do so. But he comes down to this material world to have this loving exchange with his devotees. So Prabhupada mentions that there are 5 ways how an living entity can render transcendental devotional service. That is in the form of Shanta, Dhasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. That is in form of servitorship, parental, conjugal lover, and neutrality, and fraternity. So Prabhupada is telling that there are various forms in which a Jivatma can render devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And in this case of Bhishma Dev is rendering service in the way of a servitorship, that is Dasya Rasa, that is being the servant of the Supreme Lord. In this particular mode, Bhishma Dev is rendering service to the Supreme Lord. So on the other hand, we can see as to how Krishna is serving Arjuna. So we can understand how Krishna is not only, receiving service from Bhishma Dev, but on the same battlefield, Krishna is acting as a chariot driver to Arjuna, and he is rendering service to Arjuna as his chariot driver. He is rendering service that is in form of Sakya, because Krishna is considering himself as a friend of Arjuna, and he is rendering service to Arjuna. So the Supreme Lord is, we can see as to how, he's not always in the mood of receiving service. He's also in the mood of rendering service to his devotees. How eager we are to render devotional service to the Supreme Lord. It is said that Vaishnavas and other senior acharyas, they mention that Lord is even more eager to render service to his devotees rather than receiving service from his devotees. And in this way, Bhishma Dev, we can see as to how for the pleasure of the Lord, he is rendering service. And that is the mood that we have to pick up. It should be for our personal purification. It should be for the pleasure of the Lord that we have to render devotional service rather than for our own glorification. And it is here Prabhupada is mentioning that, the arrows that Bhishma Dev is piercing into the body of the Supreme Lord. It is said that because Bhishma Dev is on the other side and he's shooting arrows to the body of Krishna, it is said that the mood of Bhishma Dev is that he's offering flowers to the Supreme Lord and not arrows. And that is why the Supreme Lord is happily receiving those arrows that is shot by Bhishma Dev. So we can understand as to how it is the mood in which we are rendering devotional service. Even though Bhishma Dev was shooting arrows, but in his mind, he's thinking that he's offering flowers unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. The Lord is very pleasingly accepting this shooting of arrows, because he's on the other side and he knows that he cannot offer flowers to the Supreme Lord, and he's off, and in that way he's offering the arrows, and the Lord is happily accepting it. And we can see in this reference as to how the Lord tells Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam Yome Bhakta Prayachati Tadaham Bhakti Uparartham Asnami Prayatatma. So the Lord in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, he tells that if anybody offers a flower or a fruit or a leaf with devotion, with love and devotion, then I will surely accept it. And similarly, it is not only that the Lord is telling, but here he is showing as an example, keeping Bhishma Dev as an example. He's showing that even though Bhishma Dev was shooting arrows, but since he's his mood is offering that of roses to the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Lord is accepting only because the main ingredient in the entire offering of Bhishma Dev is his love and devotion. Because Bhishma Dev is offering these arrows in love and devotion, the Lord is ready to accept it. So one thing we saw is how Lord is Satchit Ananda, and how the mood in which we are offering service, and if we are adding the ingredient of love and devotion into the service that we are performing, it may be arrows that Bhishma Dev would be offering, but because its bhava was that he was offering roses, and because the Lord is Bhavagrahi Janardana, he sees the mood, and the Supreme Lord is accepting it. So our mood in rendering devotional service becomes important. And finally, that how it is very important to see that how if one knows the transcendental activity of the Lord, because janma karma chame divyam, he tells, and anybody he tells, the Lord tells that his janma karma, he's coming down to this material world, his janma, his birth and his activities are all divyam. And anybody who understands the transcendental activities or the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Lord, the Lord himself tells that they don't have to take birth in this material world again. But on the other hand, it is so confusing because the so many pastimes of the Lord is, it is just so confusing for the to understand the activities of the Lord. So Prabhupada tells it is bewildering only for the asuras, those people who are who are demonic in nature. Only for those people it is confusing, because they are unable to understand. The Supreme Lord is not going to reveal to everybody, only to his pure devotees who are rendering loving devotional service unto him. Only to them the Supreme Lord is going to reveal. So to the asuras or the atheist, it would be difficult to understand the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, because we can see that in the battlefield, it is the same Lord who tells Arjuna that I will not pick up any. He promises, telling that I will not pick up any weapon, and he is the same Supreme Lord who is picking up weapon and in order to protect his devotees. So all of these activities of the Lord is so bewildering. Um, it would be very confusing for people in general to understand the activities of the Supreme Lord, because we can see that that Supreme Lord who cannot be, even after performing so many penances and austerities, even demigods cannot reach the Supreme Lord. He is, he comes down comes down in this material world, and he is allowing his mother Yashoda to bind him. That Lord who cannot be bound by anybody, somebody like Mother Yashoda is able to bind the Supreme Lord. And how is it possible? Because
Internet problem, I think. Can you able to hear her? Hare Krishna. Can someone able to hear what Mataji is saying?